having that rhythm of business where those different elements and different kind of stakeholders are involved is really what we do, and we do very well, I think. The head of sales is going to have a very, very different viewpoint to the head of engineering. Both are completely valid, though. Now, which one trumps each other?
Hello and welcome to Building Globally, Lessons in Enterprise Product Growth, the podcast which asks, how do enterprise products grow? And which just occasionally asks, does testing have anything to do with it? We'll be talking to people working in product in some of the most exciting businesses in the world in software. We are Global App Testing. Enjoy the show. Hello and welcome to Building Globally, Lessons in Enterprise Product Growth. Our guest in this episode is Marc Esmiley, a technical program and product director at Microsoft. Marc has been at Microsoft for 6 years, where he works with regulators and internal and external stakeholders to help drive compliant and secure products for financial services businesses. Marc is an expert in all things cloud. Welcome, Marc. How are you doing after the long weekend?
Thank you very much. Yeah, very good. Yeah, it's nice. Long weekend, get my head settled, and now straight back into it. So,
can you just start by giving us a bit of a sense of your place within the Microsoft family and what it is that you do for Microsoft?
I sit within the engineering organization, essentially. So it's the industry solution engineering team officially. And I sit within the financial services kind of pillar within there. My team work with our customers directly and also kind of work with our product group. And also kind of key stakeholders, as you said, which in financial services, of course, that's regulators. And we try and kind of put all that together and then essentially deliver the best product for customers. And that'd be a mix of one Microsoft product, especially within Azure, or it might be multiple, depending on kind of what the customer actually wants to do.
And the customers are, am I right in understanding, they're financial services institutions? So you would build for a bank or whatever it is.
Yeah, exactly. Bank, insurer, capital markets, a variety of kind of customers that come under, financial services. But essentially, yeah, absolutely. There's a wide range. Even the banks, of course. There's a wide range of banks that we work with, and my team, even though we're based across EMEA, we work with global customers because obviously a lot of the kind of customers we work with are not small. So we do work with a couple of small fintechs and, ISVs that develop very key solutions. But for our kind of larger customers, they're usually global. But yeah, a wide variety of customers, definitely.
And can you give us a sense of, so you've been doing that for sort of 5-6 years. Can you give us a sense of what some of the challenges that regulators and financial services institutions have been trying to figure out in terms of their, security, but all kinds of other issues as well in that time?
If you roll back the clock, like 10 years ago, cloud was this, it was seen as a high risk option to go to. And especially financial services, they were kind of looking at it thinking, is this worth the risk, of me kind of going there? And, the nature of their business is to minimize risk a lot of the time. So a lot of the kind of, financial service customers that we worked with were kind of very, very cautious on kind of doing that. And so were the regulators as well, because they were very used to kind of private hosting organizations. You would pay them subscription fee or set fee. You would get some physical tin. You'd install what you wanted to do with it, and it could be caged off or not caged off, depending on how much you pay. A variety of different services models. But fundamentally, it was very easy because it was a one-to-one mapping. But then kind of cloud came, obviously Microsoft came into the picture, and Google and Amazon. And, that's a one-to-many mapping there. And the thought process of us saying, well, actually your data sits somewhere in that kind of region or area that, the regulators are like, oh, this doesn't make sense to us. What's going on here? And the customers are kind of on the same side of that as well. They're like, well, I don't understand this. Well, what does this mean? So a lot of the work we had to do earlier was to really kind of like unpick that aspects of what is cloud. And that's quite a big question, I think, sometimes when you kind of come down to how a business operates and how moving to cloud would change their operating model. And that was a lot of stuff that me and my team used to do, with a wide variety of stakeholders, kind of CTOs, CIOs, sometimes, kind of go to the CFO. So obviously it'd be a lot of the budget conversation. Right down into the actual engineering core teams within these customers, because we were essentially talking about changing the way that they operate as a business. And yeah, so it was a big challenge for us.
When you say with cloud migration,
Mm.
what year is this? Because for a lot of businesses, the cloud migrations were happening back in, well, I don't know, 2010 maybe. And I guess financial services is a bit of a lag there. So when abouts did the cloud migration thing happen for FS?
I mean, so I think FS started with a lot of archive backups going, kind of when cloud first launched, and that was great, And then when you looked at like 2015, roughly, they actually started to look at it saying, okay, can we put production systems on there? And certainly within, FS, we've got a lot of different classifications of data, highly sensitive, sensitive, and then it kind of comes down the ranks on, how at risk that data would be if it kind of got out to the public domain. As we started to kind of get more production systems on there, they were kind of more like, well, actually, could we just get a very simple, kind of a client wants to log in and see what their portfolio is? Could we get, some kind of system on there, kind of on, in Azure essentially? Yes, great, awesome. And then, as we started to kind of challenge the ways of working, challenge what, systems we could put onto, Azure, it kind of went up the ranks. And that's really because of, the confidence in the customer, confidence in the regulators, and also, confidence in us, because quite frankly, working in financial services to, like, for instance, retail, we have to operate. Microsoft obviously has to operate slightly different to that, and it's about standardizing their offerings across those different industries. So it was a growth perspective for us, probably about 2015 onwards, I would say.
So that was to 2015 through to today. In terms of a kind of problem landscape, what are the kind of big challenges that you what's been resolved? What is it that you can sort of say, this has been done, we've solved it, we've got the answer, and we've kind of moved on as an industry? And what challenges are there now in the kind of problem landscape that clients are talking about?
Yeah, I mean, I think a big tick in the box we've done is having that open conversation. And I know it sounds really silly to say, but it was always like, oh, could we do this? Not sure if is that allowed? I'm not sure. And it would be like, okay, well, we should just carry on doing what we should do. And then, we'll challenge that later on. But now we have a really healthy relationship with all the regulators, and especially in the UK as well, and in Europe as well. There's a lot of initiatives that we're brought in actually early as Microsoft to help, have that conversation and say, look, actually, you look at the new DORA standards that are coming in kind of middle of this year for disaster recovery. And there's a lot of other stuff that's kind of coming in as part of that kind of umbrella. And, we've been in conversations, even, from a legal, from a technical, from a policy perspective, with these, kind of new policies coming in at a very, very early stage. So not only have kind of like we brought the regulators in for an early conversation about a customer that we're potentially working with, they are also bringing us in to an early conversation about a potential change in policy. Because they know that will create a ripple, and then obviously with any ripple, there may be a risk. So I think that's a really strong change of kind of a direction that we've taken, and I see it everyone's taken. Actually, it's not just us actually. And I think as we start to mature, that's going to be the challenge, because we are a pretty rapid organization, obviously from a product development perspective. We
Sure.
Launch new products. We've got 200 plus in Azure these days, and new features coming out every month. New services are coming out every year, even monthly, actually, sometimes. So how we get them in line with new standards, I think, is really key, so that our customers can adopt them effectively and quickly. Because the last thing we want to do is go to a very big bank and say, we've got this amazing product, it's going to solve all your problems. They're going to be like, great, awesome. We'll onboard that. And we're like, well, actually, we're not really sure if it's going to work for you guys, because of this and that. And, you might be fined if you use it. And, and then everybody's like, well, what's the point of this conversation?
That's a really interesting, because would it be a case of you and the client going to the regulators and saying, we think there's a really strong case for this, but it would need a change in the law, that sort of thing?
There's definitely been joint ventures. We've gone to, kind of the regulators and said, like, actually, what would this mean? Let's support this conversation, or actually, do you see in any kind of standards that we might need to flex upon? And I think that's, that is where the strength of the conversation is coming in, is because that's going to be something that's going to be ongoing. Where I don't think we'll ever resolve it, because we want to change as a Microsoft organization what we offer to customers, and of course our customers want to change for their customers. So we're in like a bit of a sandwich model there in the middle of everyone, and we want to make sure that we can. The goal is to launch products as quickly as possible, but as quickly as effectively as possible, I think, is probably the key word.
Yes, and it's a very challenging area for regulation because because it's a specialized area and it's a technical area, and elected politicians are not going to have the actual domain knowledge to really understand the detail.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a very complicated thing. Could you pull back the curtain maybe a little bit in terms of how that all works? So so you've given the example of you and a client might go to the regulators and say, hey, look, we think that there's an opportunity here, or it's moving in this direction, but would need a change in the law. The regulators, I guess, sometimes brief out suggestions for the way that things might work in the future and offer feedback. Is that the kind of thing?
At the end of the day, they're advisory. And there is a problem there because you can interpret, the language differently. And one customer might interpret a policy one way, another might interpret it another way.
Yeah.
A really good one about this was the concentration risk paper that came out probably about, I think it was just before COVID. So it was maybe 2018, maybe into 2019. And it was all about, should you have all of your assets with one cloud provider? What does that mean? Is that a good thing or is that a bad thing? And there's lots of different interpretations of that. And that did result in us actually writing a white paper about it to kind of make a recommendation. And that was in consultation with PRA, the Bank of England, in the UK, because we wanted to make sure that if we were going to write a white paper, we should obviously have the backing from the regulators on this one. We should kind of go and almost out them or say that they're wrong or, or kind of. So I think there's that aspect, that we need to be very careful on about how people are interpreting the language and how that's understood. I think that's going to be something that we'll need to, obviously keep a watchful eye on. And there is also an aspect of, we talk to, for instance, the Bank of England, we have a regular catch up with them, their head of policies, their head of, their head of technology, they're all their different kind of branches within the Bank of England, the PRA, the FCA, and we do it, with the Treasury as well in the US, and we do it, with other regulators across the globe. But it's really having that tough point with them to say, what are you working with your customers on? What does this mean? What changes coming up? There was a big question, about, what it means for the UK, for European policy. Is there going to be any change for us? So, a lot of customers are asking the Bank of England that question. And of course, because we operate a lot of the customers in the UK, they were kind of asking us that question as well. So it's really easier, or it's a lot cleaner if we give the same answer and we don't give a Microsoft view and a Bank of England view. And then it's like, which one should I be listening to? Because I need to kind of take advice from both of them, but I'm not really sure which one I should take advice on for this one.
Do you need to be in a company the size of Microsoft in order to have these kinds of conversations with regulators? There's something that a lot of people sit and worry about is regulatory capture. And obviously the government is going to be prepared to chat to a company like Microsoft in a way they wouldn't the next startup along. So I wonder if you had any advice for if somebody was maybe in a smaller fintech, how would you go about that?
It's a good question, really. It's a difficult one, I think, because I think there's a lot of information that you can actually kind of benefit from. People like Microsoft and other big CSPs as well that are having these conversations and then understanding what that means. And the outside view in is always nice to get. So if you can kind of get a consultant to kind of come in and just do a very, very focused session with you. If you really feel it's a risk for you, I would always say lean on expert advice. Now, it might not be directly from the regulators or one of the kind of institutes that we've talked about, but it might be somebody who's had great exposure to them. And I think that's where, don't be afraid to kind of get external advice. The best thing is to do is, square it off, get that tick in the box instead of kind of making an assumption, because that's, one assumption could lead to another. And then, you're kind of going down a slippery path in all honesty. But the good thing about us, I would say from a Microsoft perspective, is we do write a lot of white papers about this. So the big standards that are coming up, the big changes that are coming up, we have a whole financial services program built up. So you could be a small fintech, you could be 2 people, and you could still be absorbing that information from a big standards perspective. Now, there'll be nuances of how you operate, but that's up for you, to kind of decide on kind of where to seek that advice from. But I would say, lean on the bigger providers to kind of gather that information. and then seek, specialized advice for the areas you feel are concerned.
Final question before we move on to information management. I wonder, you mentioned you work with Bank of England, and then there's a number of others. I understand that there's international regulatory bodies as well. Is there any sort of sense of a difference in style you can give us between some of the different kind of countries and parties, or is that not possible?
I think we've got quite a standard style, in all honesty, depending on who we deal with. And it's like that old school kind of terminology. If it's not written down, it didn't happen. And I think that's the same with all of our. If we have a conversation with any of the regulators and we say, oh, it'll be this, they'll be like, okay, great. Can you write that down and send it to us? Maybe that's a de-risk strategy they all have. I don't know if it's the same, kind of guidebook they're given when they start. But there is necessarily very similar approach that they use, and it needs to be well documented. And that's usually the thing that shines through quite quickly. What I would say is that what I've seen across the geos is the UK, the Bank of England in particular, and PRA are held very highly actually in their stature. So advice given by them is actually sometimes picked up from other countries and other geos. And then they sometimes tweak it a little bit, or they actually just say, we're going to follow these same standards. So if you can kind of have that good conversation here, and we're quite fortunate, obviously, to be in the UK, but if you can kind of get that tick in the box from the Bank of England, it's usually a little bit easier for you to kind of go elsewhere. So they're definitely talking to each other. I can guarantee that.
As a Brit, that's very encouraging to hear. The second sort of area I wanted to ask you about. So obviously, not many of us work in financial services compliance, but a lot of people have worked with complicated products that involve lots of stakeholders. And I wanted to ask a little bit about how you run information management or information management in the development of a specialized product. I wonder, can you, besides the kind of regulatory thing that we've just spoken about, can you briefly kind of give us an outline of the Microsoft process for developing a financial services product?
Yeah, I mean, I would say this is pretty standard across any of our industries now, actually, or pretty standard, I would say. So there's always tweaks, there's always exceptions, but fundamentally, when we roll out global products, there's quite a rapid deployment that we follow. We follow a sprint cadence, and at the end of the sprint, of course, we have retros to kind of feed into what's worked well and what hasn't, as well as kind of putting into our sprint planning on what will be shifted right into the next sprint, and then potentially what might be de-scoped or changed depending on priorities. And we have a lot of stage gating across that, from when we kind of look at it. So, whenever we're kind of going through a number of sprints, we go to launch a product, we always launch it in our canary environments. And canary environments is internal testing. As we refer to it as dog fooding, eating your own dog food. And, it's to let, developers and other kind of internal users from Microsoft perspective test it, because we're the harshest testers usually, as any internal organization is. And then when we kind of go through that, then it kind of obviously goes into more sprints and based on that feedback. And then it goes into our EAE program. And that's the early access program, basically. Small set of customers, understanding, does this work for you? If you had it, if you wanted to design it differently, what would you do? So a lot of research analysis, even like tweaking the UI or the UX perspective, and then understanding the features that sit underneath that. What does that work? Does that work great for you? Or if you would have something different, what would you do? And then after that stage, we essentially go into a private preview, and that's more wider kind of breadth of customers. And then we go into public preview, and then we go into general availability. Now, the interesting thing is that until we get to GA, normally, now it does vary on each service, but normally we're not charging for it. And there might be a small charge for it. And also there's no SLA, there's no fixed support module for it. And the reason for that is because we're ultimately completely clear with customers. This is us doing our research. Yep. Until it goes to a GA status, we might not even launch this product because our customers might give us feedback, and we might think, actually, we need to take this right back to the drawing board, or we might need to kind of roll it back a couple of stages and completely re-engineer this because of something that we haven't thought of. It could be, bursting your bubble, at a certain kind of phase, and that's fine. But it's that clear communication we have with those customers at each of those stages, what they're signing up for, what they're getting, what it means. Because the worst thing we'd want to happen is if somebody to kind of be in private preview with our products and say, hey, we're going to launch a product on top of this now. And then us turn around and say, actually, well, we decided not to take it to market because of whatever reason. And then they're left, in the lurch there a little bit, and it becomes a very awkward situation to us. But yeah, that's the kind of process that we go through. And some of those, from a timeline perspective, it can be shorter, depending on the size of the product. It can be really, really long, depending if it's a huge product. But it does vary. But fundamentally, from a stage gating perspective, it's pretty similar.
If you were speaking to a product manager or someone in engineering maybe, and they were moving from a product that had no compliance hurdles and was very much a sort of, develop it, shove it out, see what people think. And they were moving into something that was much more complex, much more regulated, and where there's much more specialized expertise needed in the early stage of the product process. What advice would you give that person? Were there things that you've learned that you weren't expecting to learn about dealing with this kind of complicated a process?
I think it's really about being completely clear on exactly what we're talking about when we talk about a product. Figmas or click-throughs, prototypes, even a sizzle video, if needs be, are really, really important, I think, to have, because people need to fully understand exactly what we're talking about launching and what that means for them and what that means for their business or their customers as well. And, I've seen, again, it kind of goes back to people making assumptions. People hear something and they think, oh, okay, that means this. Great, awesome. And then they go and talk to somebody else about it. And then, it kind of grows and it gets traction. And then reality, what we were talking about was two completely different things. And it could be even the way that data is stored or managed and operated. And then, of course, the internal risk team get, wind of it. They'd be like, there's no chance we're ever going to do that. Budgeting gets cut and people start, freaking out. And it can all really break down really quickly due to, just miscommunication. And I know it sounds so simple, but it really just comes down to that comms perspective and really being crystal clear on exactly when we talk about a release, what exactly is in that box? What are we getting? And of course, the next question, of course, everyone is, what are we getting after the first release? What's coming in release 2? But, let's just worry about the first release, because it's very easy for people to get excited, and they should get excited about new product launches. But it's kind of, I guess, in our nature, we start talking about one thing. We're like, yeah, but then it could do this and that and this and that. And people are like, oh, that's great. Awesome. Great. And then people get so excited and you're like, oh, but actually it's only going to go do this in the first release. And you'd be like, oh, you're just a bit of a buzzkill there. So I think it's really being focused on the comms and keeping the lids tied down on that one.
Somebody's describing something complicated to me. I'm a slow thinker. You know that term, Daniel Canahan, thinking fast, thinking slow.
Yeah.
I'm a slow thinker, and often there'll be somebody who's talking about idea 3 or 4, and I'm actually still trying to process idea 1. And with a terrible short-term memory as well, if it's not written down, to me, it doesn't exist at all.
I fully agree. I'm really visual. And I think it's so much more powerful when somebody can see it. If someone tries to explain something to me, I'm kind of thinking in the back of my head, going, yeah, cool. And I much prefer if somebody just said, should I just roll out the whiteboard and I'll draw something? Even if it's like, I've been referred to as having chicken scratch as handwriting. But at least they get an idea of what I'm doing from a picture perspective. Now, it's not any great picture. I'm not going to win any awards for that. But at least they kind of get a good feel for what we're talking about. And I think that's really important. And that's probably also important as well, is to understand how those stakeholders are going to absorb that information. And, I'm a very visual person. That's great. I know that some of my team, they're they're intricately involved in the detail, and they want to have like a proper, synopsis of each feature and what that means and what that will do. And that's fine, and I think, playing to the stakeholders' strengths and understanding and listening to them really kind of comes down to the key to success there.
Are there ways in which Microsoft has changed its decision-making progress on this kind of product?
The kind of rollout perspective that I talked about earlier is something that that's going to come into play, and things about how we roll out services for customers and with customers. Should it be an automated deployment, for instance? Yes or no? Should there be a human in the loop? Yes or no? These are sort of things that we've learned from, and we've changed. One, from the way that we develop products, and two, from the way that we develop products with customers or for customers. And I think going through that cycle and having efficient stage gating, having enough time for a feedback loop is so key. It's getting a product out. This is the I think it goes back years, obviously, doesn't it? But, marketing, I guess, versus engineering. Marketing want to get the product out as quick as possible. Of course they do. They want to get a decent revenue stream. Of course they do. We do as well. But we want to make sure that we're developing the best product available there and getting it out. And there's that element of over-promising and then being falling short, which is always disappointing, and nobody wants to be in that scenario. But then also the aspects of saying, well, when we launch this product as a first kind of trial, we only want to do a trial for a week or 2 weeks, because what quantitative analysis are we going to be able to do in that data there? That's a very short timeline, and are we actually going to be able to make any changes as well during that timeline? So having that realistic timeline and understanding of each of the stages is super, super clear, and super important. And being clear about that, I think, is an element that we've kind of learned a lot from as well.
You mentioned marketing there. One of the challenges, I guess, with businesses generally, but also with products, is how to manage multiple different departments with competing priorities. It strikes me that FS is something that it has a lot of compliance, is a huge factor of it, and obviously security. It needs to be secure. That's kind of bound up in the compliance, but also to its own ends. How do you make sure that the product is still working from other perspectives, from UX perspectives, from a commercial perspective, from that once you've addressed those high kind of regulatory and security burdens?
We make a joke about bringing the bus with us, and it's about the amount of people you need sometimes to get a decision made, because you need a bus full of people, fortunately, unfortunately, depending which way you want to look at it. But having that rhythm of business where those different elements and different kind of stakeholders are involved is really what we do, and we do very well, I think, because everyone's going to have a different viewpoint. The head of sales is going to have a very, very different viewpoint to the head of engineering, and both are completely valid though. Now, which one trumps each other is a conversation that we have to have. Boil it down to a realistic conversation, in all honesty. But we always have these bigger, if you look at the larger products we've done and developed with customers, we have a series that we've set up. So we have on the ground perspective, we have each of our kind of teams working on their goal, but their goal rolls up obviously to a larger goal and a larger goal, and so on and so forth. And, these are kind of OKR structures that we've set out. So, even my team can see exactly what my key objectives are and my key results are, and I can see what theirs are. But more importantly, I can see kind of what 2, 3, 4, 5 levels above me are. Nice. And kind of how they map up and how they obviously roll down as well. So, then when you kind of start to see that overlap, that's about, really just being collective. So we have a monthly business review, a quarterly business review, depending on what it is or what people want to, name it, as well as even just a monthly review as well. And that should be done with different stakeholders, different levels. But really, it is about having that open comms. And there's no point shunning people away and saying, oh, by the way, because I think it's a very old school methodology to say, oh, we've already got 10 people in this meeting. We've reached the quota for this meeting. We shouldn't add any more people. I've always found that bizarre, really, because if there's that 11th person who needs to come in and they really do have a strong viewpoint and they've got a really good business, kind of reason to being there, it's not going to cost us anything to have that 11th person there.
There's the two pizza rule. The 2 pizza rule?
I've heard, yeah.
That's an Elon Musk special, I believe.
It is, yeah, yeah. I mean, the thing is, it's right. There's a balance to it, I guess. If you've got somebody sitting on there and they're not saying anything, they're not contributing anything, but they're just on there.
Yeah,
it's not like what should they be on there again? And I agree. Yeah, you should cut them off. And I think I've seen a lot of people say, if you don't speak in the first 10 minutes of meetings, you should really be in that meeting. I don't know. There might be a key point. But again, if you're really, really strict on timings and you said, for the first 10 minutes, we're going to do this, next 10 minutes, we're going to do that, and people can join in for those sections. And then, or quite rightly, as we do, because we obviously, we have people in Asia, Europe, and the US, and there's never a time zone to get everyone on the call. We do a lot of async stuff. So we have Teams chats, or we have a lot of kind of streams. Marc's on stream, obviously. Recording the calls, putting the transcripts in there, letting people follow up after, and then circling back around to the bigger group. So that's fine as well. I don't think it has to be done live, but there's always that option.
Fantastic. Marc, thank you so much. I've got one final question for you. We ask this to every podcast guest, so I'm sorry to ambush you with it. We ask everybody what if you were to take a product manager you admire out to lunch, who would you like to take out, and what lunch would you like to eat with them? You can choose any venue or food style.
Well, somebody springs to mind, actually. I follow April Underwood. She is currently at Slack. I think she's Chief Product Officer at Slack. And she's been at Google and Twitter and Apple as well, I'm pretty sure. And she's got a really interesting background. And I would love to kind of learn more about kind of the challenges she's seen and what, avenue she's taken, through those different organizations she's worked with. She's also an investor as well. She helps, advise on a lot of different customers, which I think is an interesting viewpoint. And I think for a venue, I would like to keep it casual. So I would go for like one of those like crab, seafood, kind of pot places where, you get the messy bib, you get all the seafood on the table.
In very like New Orleans or somewhere.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And it would be, it's nothing, nowhere you'd want to take a business meeting because it's very messy, but I think that would completely defuse any aspects of it being professional and make it more of a chit chat.
Thank you so much, Marc. It's been amazing to talk to you.
You too, Adam. Thanks for having me.
Building Globally was brought to you by Global App Testing. To find out more about how best-in-class functional and UX testing can help your product grow, head to globalapptesting.com. If you enjoyed what you just heard, click follow on the platform you're using right now. Building Globally is available anywhere you get your podcasts.